Hey there. Welcome back to Tuesday's Tips. I'm Greg Kaiser, and we've been doing a weekly feature here on YouTube talking about image editing, specifically with Lightroom, but a lot of what we deal with will cross over to all the other image editor platforms, whichever ones you choose to work with. Definitely the concepts are going to be about the same. We've been looking at local editing here in the last, I guess, month, a little bit more, maybe 2 months now. But anyway, we started off with global edits, which is a good way to start with your image editing, and then you move into the local stuff and really fine tune it. And by local, I'm talking about masks. This morning I saw that there was a comment on one of my videos from a while back, and I wanted to share that with you, and I think it's going to make a pretty good topic for today, and it's going to kind of get us off of the routine of just one mask after another. It'll break things up a little bit. At least that's my hope. This comment was from Axel Mercury 24, and he says, for the last example, and I'm going to show the picture that we're talking about, why not deal with the clipping with a brush to not be dependent on full sliders that affect the whole image? Like that we can optimize the most contrast we want on the full picture without being held back by the little details on the pictures that clip. So what he is pretty much asking, or at least this is what I think is going on, is he was taking the tip where I was setting the black and white sliders to establish the overall contrast of the image as kind of the end result of the contrast. And while in the scope of that video, yeah, that's pretty much all that I did. In reality, though, I would go in and do a lot locally with this picture. And something that I think that this comment really sparks that I want to make sure I convey is all the different suggestions that I make, whether they be global or local, they're not meant to be a fix everything solution. So essentially, I'm not suggesting that by doing this globally, you've now got the end result, or doing this locally, you've got the end result. It is a culmination of everything. And for me to go through each one of those phases in one video and explain whys and the hows and what each thing does, it would be an incredibly long video that even I wouldn't be able to make it through. I would have to stop and get 3 or 4 different meals during that. So I break it up and I talk about what each thing kind of does and gives you an idea of what you can do with image editing. That's the whole goal of this Tuesday's Tips feature. But I don't want it to get lost saying that because this week's video is dealing with contrast globally, that is the only contrast we're going to deal with, or the only way we're going to deal with contrast. That is starting a process. These local masks that we're talking about for local adjustments, that's a continuation of the process. For demonstrating these masks, I'm not going in and saying, okay, these are the global edits that I'm doing. Let's do the local edits to go with these small things. I'm showing what can be done. So what I want to do is go in and we're going to look at this picture again, and this is the one that we're talking about. It was one from an Outer Banks trip that I made back in March. And this really cool 46 Chevy with the wire spoke wheels, which I just don't see that often, and the street tires just really caught my eye. But what we went through in the previous video, and if I remember, I'll link that down in the description. But essentially, we looked at this from a contrast standpoint. Nothing has been done. This is the raw capture. I even have kind of the clumsy crop up here because I didn't know how I wanted to deal with all of this. So I gave myself just a little bit of extra room so that I could work it out. Now, the end result turned out to be cropped like this. So it took out the little bit of molding here, it took out the windshield trim, and it just simplified the overall composition. As you see, there's a whole lot more contrast built in, a whole lot different color. But the raw straight out of camera is right here. It is generally flat, which is customary for a raw image. Now, I exposed to the right, and that's another concept that I've talked about, so I could make sure that I didn't block up any of these shadows so that I could work with them depending on how I wanted to edit the picture. So that's the first step. When you capture an image, you want to know that you've got everything that you are going to need to work the image. And if you look up here at the histogram, I don't have anything that is blocked up. I have detail down into what actually will become absolute black. But I wanted that there because it is more important to me to be able to get these shadow details than to capture these specular highlights. And by specular highlights, I'm talking about the areas of a scene that are going to be brighter than our eyes could resolve anyway. And that could be looking at the bright sun. I don't recommend it, but that's the concept. And when we're dealing with highly reflective surfaces like this chrome, there's areas on it that we're not going to see detail in. The sun is shining on this chrome, it's reflecting the intensity of the sun. We're not going to see detail there. So for me, I'm not worried about capturing that little bit of details. So you see up here in the histogram, there is an amount of clipping. Now, because I shot this in RAW, I can recover a good amount of that. That's not much clipping. It's probably a third of a stop, maybe a tad over. And I can get that back in post if I needed to. And that's kind of what we did with this. I remember we dropped the highlights down, and you see just by doing that, and the highlights are these areas up here in the histogram. It's the brighter areas, not the absolute. So we're just affecting this area right here, and we're bringing those down so it kind of takes that painful look away. It's no longer painful to look at. We still have just a hair of clipping right there. And if we go to the whites, and if you remember, press Alt on a PC or Option on a Mac, and then left click on your mouse, you can see where those pixels are clipping. And all of those are actually pure white, in my opinion. So I didn't do a whole lot. I may have boosted the whites just a little bit, but somewhere around in there, that looks good. With the shadows, I don't really want to boost anything here because it's going to start looking really unnatural really quickly. And it looks too flat. I do want to keep some of the darkness there, but we're going to look at that. I want to see where my black point actually is. So we're going to do that Alt or Option on a Mac, left click on the mouse. We're going to drag to the left. And right there, we're starting to see some absolute black. If you see where the fender well is, those black pixels, that's everything is clipped. There's nothing left. The colored pixels are just those color channels are starting to clip. Now, important thing to remember here is we have not destroyed those pixels. The information is still there. Lightroom is non-destructive. So just because I've made this edit does not mean that the information is no longer there. I can go in and locally bring back shadow here, and I would actually get that information back, no problem. But the idea with doing a global is to get a working platform that I like, that's getting closer to what I want. And when I'm dealing with the black slider, that is this area right here, and it's just dealing with those pixels. Same thing with the white slider, it's right here. The highlights are right along in here, and the shadows are right along in here. If you ever need to remember what that is, hover over the slider itself, and you can see up on the histogram, if you look just to the right of that left arrow over the green hump, that's the shadows. Now if I move this to the highlights, you see where that is. And the exposure is that part in the middle. So just because we're adjusting these things here, we're not sacrificing all the pixels throughout. We are establishing a more gradual curve, and we're spreading some things out. So the idea is you get a picture that has more or less a logical transmission or transgression. I'm losing my words here, and this is why I need to learn how to edit video. Transition is what I'm looking for. Okay, we're at the day calendar, here we go. So I want to have a logical transition from the absolute black tones to the absolute white tones. And if I start at this stage going in and doing local adjustments on, say, the chrome here and here, I'm going to end up with contrast and a relationship of tones that doesn't make sense to the overall image. Plus, it makes more work for me because now I'm having to look at everything on here locally. Now that I've got a logical progression between the highlights and the shadows, blacks and whites, everything falls in line, and I can go in and then work the local edits more. So without getting into a whole lot of stuff here, I'm not going to go through and do all the different sliders here, but just dealing with contrast, I would come down here to the tone curve at this point. And let's see, we'll probably just go ahead and do the color picker here and pick an area that I want to make just a little bit brighter because I'm starting to add some contrast. So I'd pull something around there and then somewhere here. And now we're getting a nice little bit of contrast here, but now we're starting to see that this area has gotten darker. So this is where we go back up, and now we can start playing with the shadows a little bit because now it's starting to make more sense. We still have a good solid black point here, and if we look right along in here, we actually have clipping. It's hard to see just by hovering, so I'm going to do the Alt or Option, and you see right along in there, you're just starting to get a little bit of clipping, but we've got the contrast built in, again, globally, making the picture do what we want to do. Now we go in, we do a masking, and we're going to go ahead and let's see what happens if I do subject. And it's probably not going to because I did a heavy crop on the subject. Lightroom's going to have a hard time figuring out what the subject actually is. Okay, it actually worked out pretty good. You see part of up here, it didn't go in. Just for conversation's sake, we're going to add a brush. We're going to do my B brush, which is at 100% flow. I'm going to go ahead and take the auto mask off just so we can make this a little quicker. And I'm going to finish painting in this car. Now this is an area I know I'm cropping out, so it's not really a big problem whether that's there or not, but I want to do this as accurately as possible. So from here, we've now got the car figured out. So I want to go down here to the effects, and we're going to look at clarity. And this is going to be another version of contrast we're going to add in. And we're just going to pump up the contrast between neighboring light and dark tones. So we're giving this a little bit more presence. If there was a lot more rust, I would probably go ahead and do some texture here, but most of this is relatively smooth, so I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to do a new mask, and I'm going to do a radial gradient this time. I want to give a little bit more to this wheel. And we're going to talk about the radial gradient more at another point. And again, this is just going to be done really, really quick and fast. I'm not looking for wonderful detail at this point or to have it done exactly right. So from here, let's go ahead and do the tone curve. And let's pick one of the brighter areas because I want to make kind of the highlighted parts pop just a little bit more, and I want to bring that on up. And then I want to get down here with some of the darker tones, and I'm going to pull those down. Okay, so now we've got a lot of nice definition here. And again, this is probably not even the way that I edited it the first time. And it just kind of goes along with what you want to do and how you think the picture should go. So I've added a little over 1/10 of a stop of exposure here to the wheel. Now, at this point, things are starting to look pretty good. I'm going to go in here, create a new mask, and we're going to select the background. And it's going to detect it, and there we go, everything that's not the car. Let's just pull it down just a little bit. There we go. Now we've got the eyes going to the brightest part of the car. And let's go with another one, linear gradient. We all remember that one from, I believe, last week, but we're going to come in from the corner. We're going to do something like that, and then we are going to intersect with select subject. So we're only going to be affecting here, and I'm going to go ahead and add back the windshield area that Lightroom did not want to bring in, just because it will look funny if I don't here. So we're going to do that, and we're going to add just a little bit of darkness just to push the eyes towards the front of the car. So about 1/4 of a stop reduction. And things are looking pretty good at this point. Now if we take these, 4 masks off, that was the global edit. And here's what we've done locally. And what I really want to point out is most of the heavy lifting with the contrast is done locally. Everything that we did globally as far as setting a white and black point, that is very fluid and will change through the edit depending on what you do. But for me, and the way that I like to edit, I like to have kind of that uniform canvas that has a flat image that I build contrast back in. I've got the contrast material available with the initial capture. The global edit gets me a flat image to really work with and kind of gets the overall feel of what I'm looking for dialed in. The end result is something that is achieved locally though. And if we go back to the original, we can see down here, I did drop the highlights, I did boost the shadows. The whites I kept where they were. The black point I dropped 12 points, added a little bit of overall texture for this one, pumped the vibrance up a little bit. Down in calibration, we adjusted a lot of the colors here. Color mixer went in and did a lot here. Tone curve, kind of an interesting S-curve, but I ended up pulling out parts that I really wanted, and there was a lot of working around that I did. There's no color grading done. Detail, pretty standard for what I do. The effects, added a little bit of a vignette. Lens correction just went with what I have as a default loading in. When it comes to the masks, this is what I ended up doing. Added clarity to the car. I added a vignette with the radial filter, did some work with the wheel, kind of closed it in the upper right. I did another mask on the lights just to give them a little bit more presence. I isolated that hood ornament to give it more presence also. So again, I'm building in contrast locally where I need it. The top hood ornament, same thing. I've added a little contrast up there. Closed in the scene down here at the bottom. And then that part of the ground with the white pebble was a little bit bright, so I just darkened it down a little bit with a brush. So when it all comes down to it, that's what it started out as, still a little bit flat, but that was the global edit. Then I went in and did the local, and that's where I really popped the face of this car out and made that the focal point. I added emphasis on these chrome areas. The grille worked just fine the way it was. I added some emphasis here on the wheel. So with the global edit, I was just getting that flat picture that is more or less where I want to go with the edit. The locals were done to really fine tune it and give that look and that feeling that I was after. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about, you know, doing the different phases. I'm just showing what can be done with each of the phases, and I don't want that to get lost in translation at all. Back here. And I'm really thankful for the question, and I hope between my comment back to him and this video that I've kind of explained myself. And by no means am I saying that what I do is right. What I do works for how I want the photograph to look and my vision for it. Your artistic vision, your visual language, your artistic voice is going to be your own. And I want you to just know what the tools are available and then proceed through everything as you see fit, which is another reason I'm not taking you step by step and saying, I do this, 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 and this, because I don't want you to go through the same thing and do this, 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 and this. I want you to know what the tools do so that you can incorporate them in your own edits and you're not afraid to experiment. And one of the things that I've learned, especially doing this feature, because I'm going back and revisiting a lot of images that I've done previously, obviously, I'm seeing different ways to edit because I'm coming into it with a different expectation. Instead of, okay, I see the end result in my mind and I'm going to do what I need to get there, I'm saying this is an element that I want to work on, and these tools are what I can do or use to make that happen. And as I'm doing that, focused on a much smaller portion of the image, I'm doing things differently than I would normally, and my edits now have changed from when I started this feature for that very reason. I'm teaching myself different ways to do edits and different ways of using the tools because I'm spending more time with each of the tools to explain what they're doing, which in turn forces me to learn more about them and to functionally use them differently. So I'm very thankful for this feature for my own knowledge, believe it or not, and I hope I'm benefiting you as much as I'm benefiting me. But keep bringing those questions in. They do give me great ideas for upcoming videos. I'm here really to help you. If there's anything that I can do, drop a comment, drop me an email. If it's something that we really need to flesh out and work on for a longer period than just an email or two, I'd be happy to entertain doing some mentorship with you and help you through whatever you're looking at within Lightroom or anything technically photography related. I'm happy to help you if I can. If it's outside of my scope, I'll be the first one to tell you that's above my pay grade. But if it's something that I feel like I can benefit you, I would like to do that. So I'll leave a link down in the description for my mentorship. Again, my words are just leaving me. But anyway, if you want to do a mentorship, I'll leave a link for that down in the bottom, and you can check that out. And one of these days, I'm going to learn to edit video, and we won't have these little goofs. But hey, I am who I am, and it's not going to be perfect. So thanks for joining me. I look forward to seeing you again here next week. And until then, happy shooting, happy editing. Bye now.